Now I can see you.
Oh. So actually, this is the shirt that I wanted to wear today.
Yes.
Me, but then I saw you and Freek and Jason, and then I needed to change them.
Beautiful. We did not even coordinate any of this. It's just all happening magically.
Yeah,
Got the vibes are out there.
It's a Laravel vibes.
Yes, the Laravel vibes. Oh, I love it. Well, I think you made a smart choice, and it's only going to improve your talk. So
let's hope so. Yeah.
All right, let's go for it. I will be here if you need me. Otherwise, take it away. You can share your screen, and off we go.
Okay, I still can see you. Okay, now you're gone. All right, hello everybody out there from Vienna, Austria. This is actually my new office. I hope you like it as much as I do. And yeah, welcome to my talk. Let me only share my screen. And then I think we're good to go. Okay, welcome again. It's a pleasure being part of Laracon Online this year. I've watched it the last years. Every time it's an amazing conference. Just think about the last speakers. They were all so good, and I'm really proud being part of that. And yeah, welcome to my talk. My name is Christoph Rumpel. I'm a web developer from beautiful Vienna in Austria. I do a lot of PHP and Laravel. I blog about that. I have some little products, and I also have my one-man business, and I like to share what I do there as well. So this is basically what I do. And you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is just my name, Christoph Rumpel. Very easy to remember. And yeah, as I mentioned, I share there everything that I do. So check that out. So my talk today is called Laravel Factories Reloaded. And I think you probably already know that it has something to do with model factories, and that's true, it does. So in this talk, I want to give you a brief introduction to model factories in Laravel, what they are, why do we need them, how can we use them. We're going to do some tests in a real application. And then later we'll take a look at why maybe this is not that a good solution, or what I want to improve and what we can do about that. So this is basically the plan for the next hour, but yeah, I have no idea what happens. So this is all live, and yeah, I'm really excited. I just wanted to give a short shout out to the Code Night Afghanistan party. They have over 50 people there in Kabul. Man, that's crazy. So hey, everybody there. Hope you're enjoying yourself, and I hope you're all seeing me having a good time. I hope you're relaxed somewhere in your office or at home, maybe already having a beer. Here where I am, it's already 8:15 in the evening, so I already had one beer. So yeah, enjoy yourself and enjoy my talk. But enough with slides. I think let's start, and let's dive right in. So we're going to start by looking at this database structure. So this is the application that we're going to use today, and these are the tables that we have here. This is, by the way, a web app called Draw SQL, and it just helps you to draw out your database structure. So our demo application for today is a recipe platform. So this means we have some users, and they can have recipes, they can share them. And every recipe has, of course, one user, and the recipe has also a category like breakfast or lunch and dinner. And then also in our application, we have contests. So what this means is every user can create a contest, and then we have some participants in our contest. So these are just users connected to the contest. And then also through these users, we have recipes that take part in this contest. So this is just a little bit of the application that we're going to use. I actually wanted to build a front end for the application as well, but I just got my license for Tailwind UI a few hours before this talk, so I couldn't do that. I'm sorry for that, but we only concentrate on the code, and I think this is going to be more interesting as well. Okay, so this is what we're going to deal with, and now let's go to the code. First things first, I'm going to use dark theme. You can thank me for that later. I think we had quite enough of the light ones already here, so I'm here now on the dark side of the themes, and I really enjoy it more this way, but it's just my personal opinion. Okay, so here we have a Laravel 6 application, and that's our recipe platform app. As mentioned, we have here some models for the tables that we have seen in the category, contest, recipe, and user. And here I am in a test file called recipe test. And we want to take a look at these tests in the next hour, and we want to write some tests. So this application is already implemented, so it is already working. Probably you would start the other way around, writing first the test and then start implementing it. But for this demo today, it is much better this way. But before we're going to dive into these tests, let's talk about factories just briefly. So what are factories and why do we need them? So often in our tests, we're going to need some dummy data. So for example, model instances. And when you think about when I need a user, I could just create a new user like this. And then I would need to pass in some data. And this could be, for example, the name or the password or an email or something else. So when you think about that, every time we want to create a user and add it to the database, so that's what's happening here. We're going to define all this data because these fields are mandatory for the database. And of course, we don't want to do this all the time. So instead of that, we can make use of this global factory helper inside Laravel. And then we can pass in the class of the model instance that we want to create. So here in this example, let's just create a new user. We're going to pass in here the class, and then we're going to create a new user. Okay, just like this. Let's dump this out so you can see that I'm not telling any lies. And let's run this test here. And it's a little bit slow on my machine, but okay, it's working. So you can see we get here user, and this user is already in the database. So this is an easy example of how we can make use of this global factory helper function and in order to create a user. And when you think about it, we need these models all the time in our test because we need some dummy data. And this is where these factories come very handy. And in order to make this work, to make this user class, for example, we need a user factory file. And by default, Laravel already comes with one. And I have already created those files for the other models that we're going to need. So for example, here is now the user factory. And what we do here is we define the new factory for the user class. And then we're saying, okay, we want to have, when we make or create a new user, we want to have some default data. And inside here, we can make use of the faker library and create some nice dummy values like a name or a unique email, for example. And this time, and this way, every time we create a new user through the factory, it comes with these default values, so we don't have to write them out ourselves. And this is pretty handy. So instead of creating a new user, we can also make a new user, and this will now not store it to the database and just give us back the instance. So this is also useful sometimes. Okay, let's get rid of these of this first example. We're going to find out some more features about factories on the way, but let's start dealing with our tests. Okay, my machine is really slow, but I think we're going to make that happen. So our first test here says it tells if a recipe is published. Okay, when we take a look at our recipe model, you can see that we have here this is published method where we just return the is published field, and this can be true or false. Okay, so now we want to write a test for that. So this means first we're going to need a recipe, and then we want to call the is published method on this new recipe. So let's start by creating a new recipe. As we learned, we can use this global factory helper and just pass in here the recipe class. I'm glad PHP Storm works out my typos. And then we're going to just make a new recipe. Here I'm going to make one because every recipe is related to a user. And when I now try to create one and I haven't passed any assignment to a user, it's going to fail. So this is why we're going to make a new recipe and not store it to the database. Also for this example, we don't need it in the database. And now here I'm going to make an assertion that something is false. I'm going to start with false because when we take a look at our recipe factory, which I also have already created, you can see that by default I set the isPublished field to false. So this means now when I run the isPublished method on the recipe, here we go, it should return false and this test should pass. And you can see there's a screen here. We're lucky all tests are passing. Okay, now I want to get rid of these comments and let's also test the opposite. So let's create now a recipe and we want it to be published. So one way we could do this is by overriding the default data, and we can do this by passing into the make or the create method an array and just say now we want the isPublished field to be true. And now we need to change the assertion to say it is true now. Whoop. Yeah, here we have it. Okay, let's run this as well. And this is also passing. Okay, looking good. So, but there's one feature here that will make this test a little bit better. So passing in here this array, it works, but it's not so beautiful. So something else that we can use with Laravel factories is a state. And here we can define the state that we want to use. And I have already created one which is called published. So this means in our recipe factory, when we scroll down here, you can see we have this hidden state. And now we're saying we define a state for the recipe class and it's called published. And here we're going to set the isPublished field to true. And now this will override the default data that we have here. Let's just get rid of this empty space because it's not a secret anymore. I already showed you. Okay, so now this is going to override the false here. Okay, let's run this test again, and it is still passing. Okay, so far so good. And now here you can see with defining this state, this is much better readable because we want a new recipe and we want it to be published. And here we don't care how we get this recipe to be published. Is there one field we need to change? Are there more fields? We don't care. We just wanted to get it done. And this is a nice syntax and it's now very good to read inside this test here. So I think we're good with this first one. So let's check out the second test. So the name is user can visit her unpublished recipes. And what this means is by default, if there's a recipe unpublished, user cannot access it. But it is possible if you are the creator of this recipe. So if you created this recipe, you can also access it. And now we want to test this here. By the way, I want to mention, I have here in this recipe test, a few different tests here. So some more unit-like, some more feature-like, and I've just combined them here so it's much easier for you to follow, but don't get distracted by that. Of course, in your application, you would separate this. Okay, so what do we need here? We're going to need a user. Then we're going to need a recipe. And then we're going to need to connect the recipe to the user. And then when we have set up our data, we're going to make an assertion. And I'm going to already know that I'm going to use this acting as method, and we're going to act as a specific user. Of course, we don't have this user yet, but we don't mind. We just think about how we would that to be. And then I'm going to make a GET request to the recipes endpoint. And we're going to pass in here an ID of the recipe, which of course we also don't have yet. Yeah, here we go. And then I also want to make an assertion, and there's this helper method, assert successful. And what this does is, let's take a look. So inside here, we're just checking if the response, the status code, is between 200 and 300. Okay, let's go back to our test, and now we're going to make the data. So first, we're going to need a user, and we are using now the factory helper again to create a user. Again, this is only possible if you have already created the factory file for this, and we have that already. Okay, so this is the user. Then we need a recipe. So we're passing in the recipe class. And now we're going to only make a recipe. Whoop. And like this, again, because we haven't added it to a user yet, because this is what we want to do here. And on our user, we have already defined a relationship called recipes. And here we're going to save now this new recipe. Okay, so this will give us a user, then a recipe, then we add this recipe to the user, and then we're making a call as this user to the endpoint of this recipe, and then we're making sure it works. Let me see if I did everything correctly. Yeah, this is passing here, just to make sure if I don't add the recipe to the user, like this, it should fail. Yeah, and it does. Okay, cool. So here we've been using now 2 different factories and a relationship and another assertion. Okay, this is all not complicated yet, but this is how we can easily use factories. And now let's move on to our third and last test here. And here gets now a little bit more complicated. So a contest report gets sent to an owner. So what this means is when we have a contest in our platform, at the end of the contest, we can send a report to the owner of a contest. So every owner belongs to a specific user. And in our contest model, we have here this send report summary method. And here we're going to check if the contest is ready for a report. And then we're going to send out a new contest report notification to a specific user. And this is now what we want to test here. Okay, let's think about again what we are going to need. So we're going to need an owner, which will be a user. We're going to need here a category because every contest has to be connected to a specific category. So for example, a contest for lunch recipes, a contest for dinner recipes, and so on. And then every contest needs participants. So these are also just some users connected to a contest. And let me see, what else do we need? An owner, category, participants. We need to add recipes to the participants because the contest is taking the recipes from the participants. So this means we need to pass users which already have some recipes. Okay, and then of course we need a contest, because that's actually what we want to test in the end. And then we also make sure to add the owner and category to the contest. Because in order to create a contest, we need an owner and a category. And then what else? And yeah, one more thing, we need to add the participants to the contest, so that the participants with the recipes now be part of the contest in the end. Okay, so here's a little bit more that we have to create. And now I want to start again by thinking about how I would want to make the assertion. And there's a nice method on the notification facade. Yeah, this first one, it makes an assertion that a notification was sent to a specific user. In our case, the user will be the owner. And then we have the contest report notification that we want to check if this one was being sent to this owner. Okay, and then in order to make use of this behavior, we're also going to need to run the fake method on the notification facade. We have already seen this in JMax talk. And yeah, as you mentioned, this is pretty nice because it just swaps out the implementation of the normal notification system with the notification fake system, with the notification fake class. And this gives us this assertion here, and it also makes sure that we don't send out a real notification to the user. Okay, so this is our basic setup, and now we want to start creating the data. Okay, let's start with the owner. So this again is all very much the same. The owner is a user, so let's create a new user. Okay, like this. Then we need a category. Again, we're just passing in the category class in order to create a new category instance. Yep, like that. Then we're going to need participants. And now we need a bunch of users again. And now in order to create multiple users, we have this nice times method on a factory. Now we can say we want to get back just 10 users, and then let's create them. Okay, what else? We need to add recipes to these users. Okay, so you need to know that when we use this times method, we get back collections of users here. So what we can do now, this is one way we can loop over this collection. And what we get back here is now a user instance. And now we can create some recipes and add them to the user. So we are calling another factory here now for the recipe class. And again, we are just making them because we don't want to store them yet. And then we're going to call the recipes relationship on the user and going to just save the recipes so that all users now have 2 recipes. Oh, of course, we just have 1 yet, but let's give them more. And let's say 2 is fine, I think. Okay, I just reformatted the code. Okay, this looks good. So now we have participants, and now we're going to need a contest. Okay, let's move on. Contest. Again, we're using the factory helper here to create a new contest instance. And I'm also going to make it and not create it because we need to add the owner and the category to it. And there are also a few ways we can do it. For example, we can pass in here an array with the owner ID and the category ID, or another approach would be over the relationships. So for example, let's start with the owner here. Let's say we want to associate an owner and pass in here our owner instance. And now we want to do the same for the category and pass in the category. So this is not stored yet, so we need to call the save method on our contest. Okay, what else? Now we need to add the participants to the contest. Okay, we have done something similar before. So we have participants, a relationship on the contest, and we want to now save many participants. And that's hopefully it. So we have now prepared a lot of stuff in order to test this. When we now try to run this, it should probably fail. And it does. Oh, I think I have made a mistake here. Let me just check. Where have I done this? Oh yeah, I think it was here. I need to call the save many method in order to store the recipes. So this was not the error that I was looking for. Yeah, this one. So notification was not sent, and maybe you already know why. I give you a few seconds. Probably already know, yeah, because we haven't done anything yet. So we're going to need to call this method on the contest now. It's called send report summary. Whoop. So, and now on the contest, we're going to run this method here. And now with a little bit of luck, finger crossed that we did everything correct here, this test should pass. And yeah, I'm super glad it did. So this is now working. Okay, so we have now created 3 tests, and we've been using factories here all over just to create dummy instances of our model. We've been using the files to define some default data, and we're using some features like the times method or like this times method, or here before we've been using the state feature of factories. And all these features and the factories itself helps us a lot by creating this dummy data. But when I now take a look at all of this code, there are a few things that bug me. So I'm going to start up here. Maybe you have seen it, but when I have this recipe here and I try to run this isPublish method, you can see that my IDE does not know about what the recipe is. And this is because this factory helper method, of course, can tell my IDE what is being returned, because every time it's something different. It can be a recipe, it can be user, it can be a contest, it can be like any model. And this is why our IDE just has no idea about what's being returned. And it's just a little thing, but it bugs me all the time because I'm using PHP Storm and I really like the auto-completion feature. Okay, there's a short fix to get around this, and this would be like this. We're telling our IDE that the recipe is from the recipe model. And when I now try to look for this publish method, we will find it now. But when you think about it, we're writing a line of code or comment just to tell our IDE what this recipe is. I really don't like this approach. And I also feel like it's a little bit of noise. It works, and at some occasions, maybe I do it, but it's not what I prefer to do. So this is one thing that I don't like about this approach. And another thing, when we go down here, especially in this third case, you can see that we have here a lot of things in order to set up our test. So all of this is just preparing data. And then down here, we're going to call the method to test the actual thing that we want to test. And of course, here are a few approaches as well to make this better. So for example, inside our user factory, I also have something hidden. Let's bring it up here. And uncomment it. And this is a factory callback. And this one is called after creating. And this means after a user instance has been created through our factory, we want to call this callback. And here we're just saying we want to add to the user some recipes. So this means for every user that we create through the factory, we're going to associate some recipes. And now we also have some recipes in our database. So when we now go back to our test down here, that's this part where we're going to add the recipes. So we could now comment this out and it should still work. Let's hope so. Because now when we create the participants, the users here, automatically we also get automatically get them with some recipes. But what I don't like about this approach and why I mostly don't use it is because here in our test, we don't know what's happening in the back. So this means for this test, it would be totally good and we have no problems. But for other tests where we, for example, create some other recipes, we maybe end up with more recipes in the database than we think we have because we don't see it here. And as I mentioned, for every user, we have these recipes. And I also don't like that it's global. So we can use it, but sometimes you run into some misunderstanding or errors because if you don't know that it's happening. Okay, what else can we do? What I've been using a lot, and maybe others as well, is we can use a setup method here in our test. So let's just override the parent one. And then the setup method is being run before every test, and we can just define some properties here, for example. So let's go back to this test here. Let's take this owner as an example. Let's go back to our setup method. add this owner here, and now let's make this a property. We're also going to need to add the property here. Okay, and now down here, we don't need to define it here, but we're going to need to access it through our property now. So one time here and another time here. And our test should still be working, yeah. And this is good in many occasions, but if you think about what else we might need to add as a property, maybe the category, maybe the participants, maybe some recipes as well. And then you can easily imagine that this setup method gets quite big. Also, when you think about it, it's not just responsible for one test, so maybe for a different test. So maybe here we need a different recipe which is published. So do we need to also add this to a property? So this can also add up to a lot of noise here and make the test not good and maintainable, in my opinion. So this is why I also don't like to do this too often. I think it works if you just have one or two properties that you define here, but if you have more data like we have here, then I wouldn't do that. Okay, so I told you a lot about what I don't like and what I wouldn't do. So what about now telling you what I would do, if this makes sense now? So there is a different approach, which is called class-based factories. And this is not a new concept. There are already a few companies out there using it. So for example, there was already an article by Titan some years ago, and I know that people from Sparsy do that as well. By the way, I now remember something that I promised someone to try. Alexa, play Backstreet Boys. Okay, I really hope that somewhere in the world now Alexa is playing Backstreet Boys. Somebody remind me to try this, so let's see if this is working. I just had it on my list when I checked out some notes here. Okay, so let me get back to what I wanted to say. Yeah, so class-based factories. And what this means is instead of using Laravel factories helper, we're going to create a dedicated class as a factory for every model where we want to need some data. So for example, instead of using this factory helper here, we would create a recipe factory class. And then maybe we want to call something like that, or not new. Maybe let's say we want to make a new recipe. And so this could look something like this. We want to create a new recipe through the recipe factory, and let's just make one. Okay, let's give it a try. I'm going to add a new directory to my test folders. I'm going to call it factories, and I'm going to add a new class called recipe factory. Okay. Let's go back to our test here. Let's import this class now. And let's see if we can make this work like this. So let's add this static make method to our recipe. And now I already know that I want to return a new recipe. And since we have a make method, we don't want to store it to the database. So we want just to return a new recipe model. And in order to do that, we maybe want to define some data. So for example, what we've been using before is to set the is published field to false. Okay, I think I also need to import the class, and I think we're good to give it a try. And we have an error. Namespace declaration statement has to be reversed. Okay, let me check. Did I do anything wrong here? Test factories. Line 4. I actually have no idea what this is about. Let me just check if I can find namespace declaration statement has to be the very first statement or after any declare call in the script. Okay, I'm not sure if I do anything there. Is it maybe just about that? I really have no idea. Okay. Let me see if I can find out what this is about. Oh, maybe it's about that. Let's give it a try. Ah, okay. So somehow I ended up adding this line here. So these are the situations in a talk like this that you don't want to run into. So I'm glad I was able to fix it. Somehow I had, of course, no idea, because when you do a talk like this in this second, you don't have an idea about that. But okay, we're good to go. Let's move on. So we tried this again, and yeah, it already worked. Okay, so this is now the most simple way of making use of a class-based factory. So let's think about how we can move on and also do this for that. So here we're going to need now a new recipe, but we want it to be published. Okay, of course, this is now not working, but let's think about how we could make this work. So I think what would be nice is a method here called published, and then maybe chain this make method here like this. So I think this would be a nice syntax and API to do that. In order to now create a new factory, I need to pass it now to the next method. So I'm going to call here another method, which is now responsible for returning the factory. So let's start by adding this. I'm going to know that I'm going to return here the factory itself. And let's also return the factory. Okay, now we can get rid of this static make method. We just want it to be a default one. And now we also need to make sure that we make this new published method that we want to use. So what we're going to return is the factory itself again, and then return this. So that's what we need to do at the end. But before that, we want to make sure that we can make the recipe published. And we can do this by defining a property. Let's call it is published. And let's set it to true, because through this method, we want it to be true. Okay, let's add this property here. And I'm also going to set it by default to false. Okay, and now instead of passing here false, I'm going to pass in here this property. So by default, it should still be false. And when we run this published method, we're going to set it to true. And then we're going to chain the make method, where we're actually using the property and creating a new recipe. Of course, we need to change this here as well, to call the new method first and then the make method. And now here we are calling the new method to get back the factory, then run the published method, set the property, return the factory again, and then call the make method to actually make the recipe. And it's working, cool. So this is how we can just use a self-made class as a factory very easily. But when you think about when we want to use this recipe factory in other tests as well, you maybe want to use a create method as well. You maybe want to use something like the times method that Laravel provide, so that you have more flexibility when you're using your factories. And this is not too complicated to make this happen. You can write it yourself, but I've came up with a little package that can help us with that. So here I have my package, which is also called Laravel Factories Reloaded. And this just helps us spinning up new factories. And it comes with this comment here, make factory reloaded, and then asks us about for which model we want to create a new factory. And we just pick one, and this gives us back a new instance. And now in this new factory instance, for example, for a user, we have now some features that we already can use, like create a new one, make one. We have here a get data method where we can define some default data, which is also very cool because we already know that from the Laravel factories, and this is something that's really nice. And there's also some more features that I have hidden here in this base factory. So let's just give it a try. So inside our recipe factory that we've created, I'm going to copy this method, this published method here, because we're going to use this. But first I'm going to delete the class that we have created. So, and now I'm going to call this make factory reloaded comment. And by the way, art is just a shortcut for PHP Artisan. So when we run this comment here, we can now ask for which model we want to create a new recipe, a new factory, and we want to do it for a recipe. So that's number 2 here. And now we have this new recipe factory here. Okay, pretty nice. So we have these methods here that we can already use. And let's also define some default data. So we want the isPublished field to be false by default. So let's just begin with that. Okay, let's go back to our test and let's see if we can make this working. Of course, we don't have this published method yet. So let's just add it. Here we have it. We're going to need to add the property as well. And we want to set it to false by default. And now we can change this here in the getData method. So every time we create a new recipe, this data is being used. And now let's call this property. And as you can see, we also have a faker instance here so that we could make use of that as well if we want to. Okay, I think this should already be it to make our test working. Yep, we're good. So now we're using our own recipe factory, but now we have created it through my package. And this is the advantage that you get with that is just some of the features just come out of the box with it. Of course, you don't need it. You can easily create it yourself. So this is also possible. Okay, let's move on to our second test here. Let me just check the time. Okay. Here we're going to need a user. So we need a user factory. Let's call our common again. I'm now picking the user. And now I'm able to call here our new user factory. And we need the new one, the new method to create this factory. And then we're calling the create method. And by the way, what I didn't mention so far is, of course, that here with our recipe, now, of course, our IDE knows about it because we just define it in our classes that we return a recipe. So this is what I like about this. Okay, let's move on here. We have now user factory, but what we haven't done is inside our user factory, we of course also need to define default values, because if we don't do that, we will run into some errors. So let's visit this old user factory, and we're just going to copy that here and just put it in. And as I mentioned, as we have access to Faker here, this should just work like this. Okay, now we're going to need to make a recipe. So let's call the recipe factory again. New, this time we want to make one. And then we want to save the recipe to the user. But there is something else that we can do. Let's just get rid of that. So when we create now this new user, we can make use of a with method that comes with my package, and it just helps us to add some data. So let's call here the recipe class as the first parameter. Then we say the name of the relationship, it's recipes, and then we could also define a number. But we just need one recipe here, so this is why it already should work like that. And then we don't have access to the recipe like this, but we can just get it through the user. So the user has some recipes, and then we're calling the first, which is now a method on the collection, which we get back here, and then we call the ID. And now this should also work, so let's give this a try. And we get an error. Let me just see. Recipes category ID. Okay, we have forgot that because inside our recipe factory in the old one, we have defined some values, and we also need to copy this to our new recipe factory, which is now here. So let's add this and delete this published because we have already defined that. Let's give this another try, and it's passing. Okay, so this is pretty cool. This with method helps a lot, but of course you don't need to use it. If you don't use my package, you can just create something like that easily yourself. You can very much easily call it with recipes, which is a little bit more declarative. And then inside this method, you can create these recipes and add them later to the user when you create it. So that's one really benefit of this approach, that we have now classes that we own, and you can do with them whatever you want, and you can define what the methods are called. And this is something that I really like. But in our case, we're fine with this method, and let's just make sure it's still green. Yeah, okay, and let's move on. So let me just get rid of these sidebars here. Let's think about our last test here. So as I mentioned, there is a lot going on here. Let's just start by getting rid of that. And let's think about how we would want this to be. So what we need here is, of course, a contest. So let's create a factory for our contest. That's number one. And so we're going to make use of our new contest factory. But now we need to think about how we would want this to work. And there are different approaches, and this is on your personal taste and what you want to do. So one way would be to add methods like with owner. I think we need to, yeah, like that, and then pass in an owner. And then maybe something like with category, and pass in a category. And then maybe also with participants. So these are all things that we know that we need for our contest in order to store it to the database. Participants. And then create it. So this would be one approach. And this can be useful if we want to pass in specific data. But in our case, we don't care who the owner is, what category it is, or who the participants are. So we could also just get rid of them and use these methods. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. And also use it like this. So this is also quite good to read. We have a contest factory, want to create it with an owner, with a category, with participants, and then create it. But for this case, when we think about it, we're not testing any of the content of this report here, of this notification. We don't do anything with an owner, category, and participants. And when you ask me, I actually don't care about it in this test. It's just noise here. So what I would want to do here is call a method called prepared for report. So this tells me now, when I go here and see this, that we're going to get a new contest. We want it to be prepared for a report, whatever that means. I don't care here. We can define this behind this method and then create it. So this is now, when I think about, for me, the best solution here, what I would want to work. Okay, so let's see if we can make this work. Let me just check my time. Okay, I hope we can make this. So I'm going to copy in here all the stuff from before, just as a starter. And when you think about it, here we are doing all the things that actually needs to be done. So what would already work is if I just return the contest here. So then I would need to get rid of this create method. And I would need to call the owner through the contest now, because the owner is a relationship of the contest. And this should pass, actually. Yeah, it does. And when you take a look now at this test method, is now much better than before. It's really nice. But I don't like this approach, because I really like to have the create method for all my factories. And I also don't like how this is implemented here. So let's see if we can make this a little bit better. So what I want to return here again is the factory itself. So this means at the end, I'm going to return the current instance and not the contest. Then, since we're already here, everything related to the contest, we can't do anything here yet because we don't get a contest here. The contest is being returned to us through the make or the create method. So up here. So here, this is where we get the contest. So this means everything down here, we can't just delete it because it's not of use here. Okay, what do we do about the rest? So owner, category, and participants. So these are important to us. So let's add them as a property. So the owner, the category, and the participants. And let's just add these properties here. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. And now here we need to call the participants through the property. Okay, then we also want to get rid of these factories, because when you use class-based factories, you want to decide if you really want to use them or the Laravel ones, because you don't want to maintain both of the default values, which would be not handy. So let's use our user factory here, new create. So this is very easy. Also the category factory. I think we maybe don't have one yet. Okay, let's create it. Whoop, where do we have my console? Yeah, category number 0. Here we have it. And then let's make sure that our category fields are the same like before. So here we have defined the name. So let's also use this for our new category factory. Where do we have it? Category factory here. So by default, it is for breakfast. Okay, let's get back here. So now we should be able to use the category factory as well, new and create. Then we need participants, which are users. So we're going to call the user factory again, new, but now we want more than one user. And this is also something that my package comes with, that there is now this times method. So we can say we want 10 users, and then we want to create them. And then we also need to add recipes. But yeah, we have already learned that we can add recipes through the factory as well. So with a little bit of luck, we should be able to get rid of all of that. And now before the times method, we can use the with method and just pass in here the recipe class as the first argument, the name of the relationship, recipes as the second one. And this time we want 3 recipes for every user. Okay, when you think about now this prepared method, it looks much better now. I think we can also get rid of this here. And now the only thing missing, if I'm correct, is that back here, when we're going to create the contest, we're going to need to add the participants now to this contest. So we have stored the participants in a property, and through the participants method, we can save now our saved participants. And then we need to make sure that we're going to return our contest. And let me think, oh yeah, 2 things are now missing. We have now the owner and the category, and we need to define them as well for every new contest. And this can be done now in our getData method, where we define the default data. And we're just saying here, if I get out of Vim, let me out here. It's crazy. Oh yeah, no, I'm back, okay, now it's working. Category ID, we're going to call it from the category, and owner ID, we get it from our owner property. So let me just check again. We have now this prepared for report method. We're going to use our factories here to define the owner, category, and participants, because that's what we need in order to send the report. Then inside our default data, we're going to make use of these properties. And when we run the create method, we are first going to add the participants here and then return the contest. Whew. And now let's go back to our test. So it looks good here. Let's give it a try and fingers crossed. Yeah, our test is now working. And when you now take a look at this approach with our class, this is pretty awesome, I would guess. So of course, this is not the only way to make your tests clean. This can also be done with default Laravel factories, but I really like this approach because you're so much flexible. Of course, when you now go back to our contest factory, this would lead into some problems because we don't have defined any default values. So when we don't run this method, this will fail. And also here we have a make method where this is not working yet. So there's a little bit more to make this work for more occasions. But as you can see, it can be done. And now I think this is a really nice approach and something that you should definitely check out. Let me just check my notes here. Did I forget anything? Yeah, just one thing left. Try to run all of our tests because I can't leave you without all tests are being green. And yeah, all tests are working now. By the way, I've been using a PHP Storm shortcut to use to run the test where I'm actually in right now. So if I just run this test, only this one test is being run. And if I'm outside of the test, all tests of the current file are being run. So that's also super handy. Good, I think this was it from the demo. Let's get back to my slides. Oh, I see Ian already, so I think I'm already.
Oh no, you're good. I just I didn't know you were finishing up. Go finish up.
Okay. So quick summary with class-based factories, we get some advantages like better IDE support, which is important to some developers like me. You have a very declarative API because you define how the methods on your factories are called. That's what I also really like about it. You end up with cleaner tests because you have better ways of hiding this stuff and you have fully flexibility. Of course, it's more work that needs to be done. I also wouldn't recommend using this for all of your application because many times you're just good enough with Laravel factories. But if it gets a little bit more complicated, I think that's a good approach to check out and try. If you want to learn more about this, check out my package. I'm going to share my slides on Twitter and also my notes here. So please check out my package. Also, please give me some feedback on it. I'm not sure if it's useful to others. I think it's quite nice, but I have no idea because people haven't tried it yet. So please make sure, check it out. Give me some feedback. Maybe we can make this together something useful for everybody. Then also there is Brent from Sparsy, and he has this Laravel Beyond CRUD online book. And there he also has a chapter about test factories. And that's really interesting. And I recommend checking this out because he describes there how they are using at Sparsy also class-based factories. And I also got some inspiration from his article for my package. So thank you, Brent, for that. And also, as mentioned, this is not something new. Titan has already posted about this approach some years ago. It's also quite similar, so check out this article as well. And also, you can just contact me if you have any questions. And I'm also here in the chat, and we have a nice Telegram chat, so you can join that as well. That's what Nuno created. And yeah, I think there's only one last thing I want to mention here. A little bit of advertising. In your digital swag, there is a big 30% discount coupon for my course, Laravel Core Adventures. And in this course, I'm going to explain through videos how Laravel works under the hood. So all the things that you're using every day, like the service container, facades, notification, the request lifecycle, all of that, I'm going to dive into the core and explain how the things are working. And on the one side, this is really interesting because Taylor did a good job creating Laravel. So it's interesting to see how he has done that. And of course, the more you know about your tool, your framework, the better you will become at debugging and using Laravel. So check it out. There are also some free videos. If you don't want to buy it, that's fine as well. And If there's anything else you need from me, you can find me on Twitter with my Twitter handle. And I think that's it. My voice is already getting a little bit low. So yeah, thank you, everybody. I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I hope you're enjoying yourself wherever and whenever you are. And yeah, thank you and see you around.